So, the information I'm about to share with you will permanently alter your relationship and perception of the mainstream media. It's a case about manipulation that I have never seen greater exemplified than in the Luigi Mangione case, and specifically a Daily Mail article that recently came out regarding his sexual proclivities. So, there is a very widespread but dangerous myth that exists in modern society, which is that the mainstream media exists as a neutral force that simply reports on objective reality as it unfolds. This is something that I definitely believed when I was younger, but has become increasingly more challenging for me to buy into as I have gotten older and as I'm able to observe and see through such obvious examples of intentional attempts to engage in mass manipulation, like this most recent Daily Mail article, which we will get into. So, the mainstream media is not a passive observer of reality. It is an active participant in shaping, in distorting, in weaponizing narratives, particularly when they threaten special interests or powerful people. They decide what conversations can be had, which conversations need to be silenced before they become a problem. And there's nothing more threatening to these special interests and these powerful people than a symbol. When somebody personifies and represents a deeper movement that goes beyond themselves. On a very deep level, this case reminds me exactly of the Hunger Games, and it made me think a lot about symbols. And what is it about a symbol like the Mockingjay or like Luigi that is so threatening to these powerful people in a way that facts and statistics are not? And I think it's because a symbol becomes an emotional lightning rod for public consciousness. And that has the ability to spark very deep and meaningful conversations that we need to be having as a society, but gatekeepers like the mainstream media just simply don't want happening, right? Think about the Hunger Games. They had to shut that down, not because these three fingers, but because of what this represented. It represented a revolt. So the Daily Mail has recently released one of the dumbest things I've ever read in my entire life, and I've read the Blake Lively lawsuits multiple times. So that's really saying something. And in it, they claim, by anonymous sourcing, of course, that Luigi had filmed at least 20 cinema-style corn videos and that he wanted to be watched. So the article is as egregious as it is obviously inaccurate and quite possibly a complete fabrication, which is proven by the fact that, number one, the source that they claim to have is just labeled an insider. It's not someone that even allegedly has a direct connection or participated in these supposed videos. It's just a random person that they quoted. And then shortly after, we of course got more information, which painted a very different picture, which was, oh, actually, it wasn't really Christopher Nolan style film videos of him engaging in these acts. It was just one very grainy nude selfie that he may or may not have taken a couple years ago. But suspiciously, the person who is in possession of this photo is attempting to sell it for $500,000. So I think in today's day and age with AI, we should be very suspicious of anything that surfaces in that regard online. So this is not the first time, and it's not the last time, that the mainstream media will intentionally deploy sex scandals as a way to destroy symbols. It is intentional, it is effective, and there are several reasons why they coincidentally always use sex scandals as a way to distract from meaningful conversations. There are several reasons why sex scandals are so specifically effective at silencing people and movements. One of them is that it triggers primal emotion. So unlike a scandal or controversy that has to do with politics or financial disclosure, it completely bypasses logic and goes straight to human instinct, our instinct to judge, our instinct to gossip. The other reason is that they're notoriously hard to prove. And even if they're later eventually debunked, there's always that stain of doubt that's left on the person, which is one of the reasons why they love to use them. So in continuing with that, whether or not the allegation is true or false, it effectively makes the individual socially radioactive because nobody wants to publicly defend someone who's been associated and linked to a sex scandal. And the last reason is they do it because it effectively distracts from the conversation. What's a more spicy conversation to have? Discussing a alleged library of Christopher Nolan-esque sex films, or the failings of the healthcare industry? And it's also a simpler conversation to have because it's so stupid. And I'd also like to add that using fabricated sex scandals as a weapon of mass manipulation is not something new. This is something that the mainstream media has been documented as doing for decades. So for example, Julian Assange, someone who may or may not be the best person in the world, but he exposed war crimes That is a very deep, meaningful, serious, raw, important conversation. And then magically what happened a few months later, we all started discussing his sex scandals with these Swedish people that was later revealed to be completely false. They did the same thing with Martin Luther King Jr. He was discussing civil liberties and racism and institutional power and capitalism, these very deep, meaningful, complex issues that are important conversations. And then what did they do? They bugged his house and exposed him for having an affair, which completely derailed the important conversations that he was sparking. And I think it's so important to view these figures like Julian Assange and like Martin Luther King Jr. in the context of what's happening with Luigi, because if we do that, we can identify patterns and see history repeating itself. Julian Assange represented so much more than just himself. It's not the person that the media and the government and the powerful interests are trying to destroy. It is what the person symbolizes. In Julian's case, he symbolized the disdain that average people have with corrupt governments. MLK Jr., even more powerful, somebody who represented and symbolized and became a lightning rod of the collectivized rightful anger of Black Americans at the time who needed an outlet to express their disdain with being treated as second-class citizens. Now, to be fair, MLK Jr.'s entire political philosophy did revolve around nonviolent resistance. However, we can still observe similarities in the way that media institutions deploy sex scandals as a way to destroy what that individual has come to symbolize. And they particularly hate it when someone begins to symbolize hope. Hope is something that's very powerful because the first step to changing a horrible circumstance, like, for example, all of us living in a world where our necks are basically being stepped on by insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies, the first step to changing that is being aware that change is possible. And that's what hope is, and that's why hope is so powerful. Again, with the Hunger Games reference. So to summarize, I wrote down the media's playbook so the next time they deploy this tactic, we can all be aware of what's really happening. So step 1 is to introduce an absurd, sensational sex scandal with zero evidence. Step 2 is to quietly walk back the story once the damage is done. And step 3 is to let the internet finish the job. And this is when people begin making jokes, which they really need to stop doing. And then slowly, the important discussion about possible healthcare reform, in this case, quietly disappears. So I think that the downfall of Luigi, not as an individual, but as a symbol, is being actively manufactured by the mainstream media in front of our very eyes. And as content creators and living in this dual world where people receive their information from either the mainstream media or internet media, we need to make a very conscious effort to not fall for their traps and engage in these very superficial, reductive conversations that revolve around crude jokes and his looks and objectifying him, because that is exactly what they want to dampen his message and the deeper conversation that is long overdue. And this might be controversial to say, but in my opinion, the true crime here is not whether or not this individual actually committed this act. It's how easily the mainstream media can silence any conversation that threatens power. And now the only question that we really should ask ourselves is, how much longer are we going to allow them to do it?